Good afternoon, everyone. Librarian Danielle Belanger here from the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library, joining you virtually. Today, we have another great program for you. The library is thrilled to have the opportunity to host a conversation with international best-selling author Armando Lucas Correa. Thank you very much, Armando, for taking the time to speak with me today, all the way from New York, and to Natasha at Simon & Schuster for making this event possible. Thank you also to Andreas at Paragraph Bookstore for collaborating with us on this event. If you want to know how to get your own copy through Paragraph, we will share information at the end and you can ask the librarian, or if you want to put your name down for today's book, The Night Travelers, we welcome you to do so, but you'll be on a wait list. So to begin, thank you very much, Armando. To begin with, I will share a condensed bio. Armando Lucas Correa is an award-winning journalist, editor, author, and recipient of several awards from the National Association of Hispanic Publications and the Society of Professional Journalism. He is the author of the international bestseller, The German Girl, which is now being published in 13 languages. And perhaps later we'll speak about the fact that the rights have been acquired to perhaps make it into a film. He lives in New York City with his partner and their 3 children. You can visit his website, armandolucascorrea.com. So before we even discuss your latest novel, The Night Travelers, let's briefly speak about your biography. Your prior work experience includes award-winning journalism and editing. Can you tell us a bit about each of these and in what ways they help guide you in novel writing?
I always said that I am a reader who writes. And I think when you read my novels, you can see my background in a way. I am a journalist, that's my major. A critic, I was a theater and dance critic. That was my minor in Cuba. And I started my career in theater. And I think you can see also those elements in my books. I remember when I started writing about the St. Louis, the MSN St. Louis for The German Girl, I was thinking to write like a nonfiction book. I was a journalist working for the Herald, and I started collecting when I arrived in the US in 1991, all the documents, book, menus, diary from the tragedy of the MSS St. Louis and all the Jewish refugees that they were denied entrance in Cuba, Canada, and United States in 1939. And I was thinking, I'm going to write a nonfiction book. I'm going to interview the survivors, the academic. But in 2005, I have my daughter, Emma, my first child. And everything changed, my point of view for the tragedy. And I think Emma gave voice to both characters in The German Girl, for Anna and Hannah. And I became a novelist. I remember when I published a book about how I have Emma, in search of Emma, and all the process through a surrogate mother, IVF. And an editor from Simon & Schuster, she reads in Spanish, and the book was published in Spanish, says, Armando, you have to write a novel. And then I said, Johanna, all the writers has a novel, behind the bed. And I show her all my investigation about the St. Louis, and I signed a contract with her in the next 3 days, That's a little my background. I'm sorry, I live in New York, and you can hear all the sounds.
No problem. Congratulations, Armando, on another masterfully written and very poignant novel. I'm referring, of course, to The Night Travelers, this one, which I was holding right there. A big thank you once again to Simon & Schuster and to Natasha, which I saw her just briefly at the beginning. So now I will share a synopsis of the book for those listening in today. Berlin, 1931. Ali Keller, a talented young poet, is alone and scared when she gives birth to a mixed-race daughter she names Lilith. As the Nazis rise to power, Ali knows she must keep her baby in the shadows to protect her against Hitler's deadly ideology of Aryan purity. But as she grows, it becomes more and more difficult to keep Lilith hidden, so Ali sets in motion a dangerous and desperate plan to send her daughter across the ocean to safety. Havana, 1958. Now an adult, Lilith has few memories of her mother and childhood in Germany. Besides, she's too excited for her future with her beloved Martin, a Cuban pilot with strong ties to the Batista government. But as the flames of the revolution ignite, Lilith and her newborn daughter, Nadine, find themselves at a terrifying crossroads. Berlin, 1988. As a scientist in Berlin, Nadine is dedicated to ensuring the dignity of the remains of all those who were murdered by the Nazis. Yet she spent her entire lifetime avoiding the truth about her own family's history. It takes her daughter, Luna, to encourage Nadine to uncover the truth about the choices her mother and grandmother made to ensure the survival of their children. And it will fall to Luna to come to terms with a shocking betrayal that changes everything she thought she knew about her family's past. Separated by time but unified by sacrifice, 4 women embark on journeys of self-discovery and find themselves to be living testaments to the power of motherly love. Sorry, that was a lot. Armando, could you please share a little bit with the audience how you became an expert, as this is what I read, on the MS St. Louis in 1939, and ultimately ended up writing 3 novels, all with ties to it. So I'm referring, of course, to The German Girl, The Daughter's Tale, and finally, The Night Travelers.
Yeah. The St. Louis, the MS in St. Louis was part of my childhood. I remember my grandmother, fighting with my grandfather around May every year that Cuba is going to pay very dearly because what they did to these Jewish refugees for the next 100 years. My grandmother was a little crazy. And, when I asked, she said and that she was pregnant with my mom when the boat arrived in Havana. And at the same time, she's a daughter of a Spanish immigrant who arrived at the beginning of the 20th century. And I think she was desperate, reading on the newspaper. And every time that we went to the harbor in Havana, in front of the, looking at the boats, she said, oh my God, I don't know, 40 years or 50 years ago, I saw the biggest boat in this country, like the Titanic. She was all the time talking about the St. Louis. When I went to college, I tried to find all the documentation related to the St. Louis. I had access to the National Archive. And in Cuba, the librarian came to me and said, oh, in a whispering, because it's Cuba, oh, Armando, we used to have like 3 boxes labeled with the St. Louis, and all of them disappeared during the 70s. And nobody knew about the St. Louis in Cuba. When I arrived in the US, I started collecting all this information and became a kind of obsession. And the St. Louis, if you read, The Daughter's Tale, in this case, The Night Traveler, I know for the German Girl is the main subject for the plot, but here is like a leitmotif. You can see the St. Louis in The Daughter's Tale and in The Night Traveler. And I am a kind of writer who spent a lot of time doing research, and I am obsessed with facts. And I'm going to put an example, and sometimes maybe the reader don't care, but there is a scene in The Night Travelers that they're going to a theater in Havana during the 50s, and that night they drive to Varadero, a beach. And the next morning, they're listening to a radio kind of soap opera, and that was very famous in Cuba. And I need to find, and something big happened to these people, but I need to find exactly which play they saw at the theater. And it has to be the same play that it was at the, because the radio was live, listen to the anecdote. And it has to be exactly the timing and the name. And I spent months trying to find all this information. And because I write fiction, but I want you to know, all the readers, that the background of the history, they're real. When I'm talking about the Nazis or the Cuban Revolution, behind that, there is a lot of investigation. That's the reason I have my bibliography at the end of the book, and you can see all the books that I consulted. And I don't mention the travel or the interviews, but and they know that I am a journalist. I am very accurate with the facts, and for me, that's important. It's fiction, you can have an emotional connection with the characters, but the background and the history is real,
Thank you. Your rich and detailed descriptions of the various timelines in your novel really enhance the reader's experiences as we find ourselves immersed in each of these spaces and locales throughout the different time periods. How did you go about conveying not only geographic locale, but also the atmospheric elements to the reader when tackling each of these women's stories?
Yeah, I remember when the New York Times wrote a review about the Daughter's Tale. It was a great review, but she said in at the beginning that my style, my voice, my style, it was atmospheric. And when she said atmospheric, because I am a writer, you are feeling that this is a compliment or this is. But I realized that it's true. When I'm writing, I need to see the scene, the high ceiling, the light, when the character moves, where they are going. I am obsessed with the smell, the texture, and with the Daughter's Tale, for example, I spent a lot of time because at the beginning of the book there is this bookseller during the burning of the books in Nazi Germany that they're gonna burn all her books, and she had to save her favorite book, one of them. And she saw all this book burning, and I studied a lot the smell of the book, because the books from the 1939, they're not the same like here. Sometimes they have leather covers, silk, a different kind of paper or glue, and I studied the smell of almond when you're burning a book, and for me, that's important. And there is one of my favorite scene in The Night Travelers is the moment that because of the Nuremberg Race Law, she need to, Lily, the protagonist, had to pass a test. And if they said that if you're impure, you are not smart or intelligent, that's one of the reasons you have to be sterilized, one of the many reasons. And she want to demonstrate that Lily is really smart. And they go to that scene, and it's like a movie, Ali is in the back, at the end with the light is Lily with the doctors and the space and the cold. I always constructing my scene in this kind of way. I think I am obsessed with all these elements. It's not only about the perfect paragraph or the dialogue. I need my atmosphere when I'm building a scene and a character too.
So you did a great job at this, Armando, and I imagine once you get into discussions, if you do, about making a television series, I can see you speaking to the directors. No, the lamp has to be this lamp. It has to be like this.
Well, we signed a contract with Hollywood Gun Productions to develop a series with a German girl. And I hope by the end of 2023, we're going to start in production. But I remember doing all this meeting for the producers. And when I showed my research, because, for example, for Alma, one of the characters in the German girl, she's this rich Jewish German. traveling in the San Luis, arriving in Havana. I have all her clothes and perfume and in pictures. I have like when I'm writing, I look like a crazy person. I have all these images around my office. I have all the chapter in the floor. And even I don't mention the brand of the dress or describe the dress, but I need to have it in my mind when I'm writing. And they were impressed when they saw all the material that I have. And some of them I buy it. I need to have postcard and the menu of the San Luis or the music program from the Marcus, the black German musician in the German. I need to see the bar and the club when they perform. And I never travel before the book is done, because I do my research, I see all these pictures, I read the books, and when I finish, I'm going to the places to check that everything is accurate. Because at the same time, and it happened with the German girl is the point of view of a little girl telling the story, and it's the voice of my grandmother. It's a story that my grandmother told me, and it's like a fairy tale. If I do the research, I interview the survivors, it's going to be a different story. And I interview them after I finish. And right now we have one survivor in Toronto, and I call her the Mexican of the San Luis, because when they were rejected by Cuba and Canada, they were returned to Holland, and they spent years in a concentration camp. They survived, and they ended in Mexico. And she married in Mexico. She had their children, and now her son is teaching in University of Toronto, and she's living in Toronto, and she's a Canadian citizen. And all these survivors, when I presented my book in New York, even in Canada, they are with me. And right now, they are my friends. We're always, sending email, talking over the phone. I need to have all this character with me when I'm writing.
In terms of writing style, you chose to navigate between separate timelines as we get to understand each of the women from one generation to the next on a deeper level. At the end of the novel, however, the timeline switches at an increasingly rapid pace. Why did you opt for this technique?
Yeah, in The German Girl, it was back and forth all the time. It was present and the past, the present and the past, Hannah and Anna. With the Night Traveler, I want to do something more linear, like if you are writing the book, even it's 1939, it's the present for me. I want you to feel that is, it's today and tomorrow, and you're feeling that you're reading the present. But I use going back maybe 10 years before to understand what's happening. The book opened when Alice having birth Lily, and she's dreaming that maybe her daughter is going to be dead. And when you finish the book, the chapter, you are asking, what is a mother can feel that way? And then you have to go back 5 years ago to understand that feeling. And I use that in the whole book, that, you are always reading the kind of present when you are reading. To understand what's happening, maybe I transport you for a couple of years before. The big jump is in the last part of the book, because you have to understand what happened with Ali. And then you go 75 years ago. And for me, that's my favorite chapter. When because you need the past to understand the present. I use that technique for the whole book. Yeah.
The historical research included in your novels is thorough and I would think essential. this being said, we talked about it a little bit, but why did you choose to approach these as nonfiction? Sorry, why did you, the opposite. I meant, why did you choose to use fiction rather than nonfiction for these stories?
That's a good question. And many times I ask it to myself because I'm a journalist. But I realized that if you go to a library or you go to the Holocaust Museum, Washington, D.C., you can find a lot of books of the St. Louis. And even from the Holocaust, there are a lot of books and studies. And when you are writing fiction, you create an emotional connection with the audience. And I remember when I presented the idea to Simon & Schuster, most of the editors, even they're Jewish, they didn't know about the St. Louis. And with the German girl and with my book, I'm trying to bring to life some part of the history that we tend to forget. It's the case of the St. Louis. It's the case of the tragedy of Orador-sur Glane in the Dorisdale when the Nazis killed over 600 people, mothers and with their women with their children in a church, and they burned them alive. And with the Night Travelers, it's about eugenic and how they sterilize, children, girls at 7 years old and boys when they were 7. And with the girl, it was X-rays, and with the boy, it was the vasectomy. And it's always easy to say that Hitler killed over 6 million Jewish, but when you are talking about the tragedy and mention that part of the tragedy, Cuba, United States, and Canada were responsible too, you tend to put it on the side. And because for the tragedy of the St. Louis, it took like 70 years to make a kind of apology in US, for example. It was during Barack Obama presidency that they invited the survivors of the St. Louis, and they did the apology in the Congress. And by the way, I helped the office of the Prime Minister Trudeau before the pandemic when they did the apology in the House of Commons. And I helped them to invite 7 of the children of the St. Louis. And I was with the Prime Minister, with the children there, but it took like many decades to do something like that. And that's the reason, because even in the Orador-sur Glane tragedy, when it was the order to burn alive all these women and children, it was from the Nazi, but the people, the soldiers, they were French soldiers, from the Alsacia part of France. And, it's better to put it on the side. It's a shame. And when Trudeau read the Prime Minister read the apology in the House of Commons, I saw a lot of politicians crying there in shame.
So Armando, for those who don't know the story, can you recap a little bit what the story of the MS St. Louis is exactly?
Yeah. In 1939, after the Nuremberg Race Law, Hitler tried to get rid of all the Jewish people. They have a huge problem in Germany because a big part of the community, it was integrated in the society. Most of them, they were blonde, blue eyes. Mm-hmm. The only way you can realize they were Jewish is because of the last name. And it was a big persecution during those years. For the people who, for the St. Louis, it was in May 1939, after the Kristallnacht, that all these people realized that they need to leave Germany. and they wait until the last minute because they were not religious, they were white, and they were rich, very rich, and they thought they can survive Hitler. And at that moment, the only country who gave them visa or permit of disembark, it was Cuba. They pay a fortune to travel in the St. Louis, and it was 937 refugees. And when they arrived in Cuba, Cuba denied the entrance, and the president at that moment required another $500 per passenger. That you think is a small, kind of money. It's a lot
at that time. Yeah.
At the time, it was a fortune. And remember, all these people have to get rid of the properties and the bank account. They only have cameras, a lot of cameras that works in the St. Louis, and jewelry, but they don't have the money. And even the agency, the Jewish refugee agency helping all these refugees from Europe, they offered to the president $50,000. And he said no. They wait a week in the Bay of Havana until they left. They went to Miami. They tried, they sent letters to Roosevelt, and they denied the entrance in. And most of them, they have visa for Canada, and Mackenzie, the prime minister at that moment, denied the entrance. When they were in the middle of the ocean, they found refugee in France, Belgium, Holland, and Great Britain. Of course, the only one that they survived the war, it was the UK refugees. The rest, they ended in concentration camp. Some of them survived the concentration camp. But it was a really sad part of the story, because before it was, a boat with 40 refugees, 20 refugees, but never 937 refugees. Only 28 passengers disembarked in Havana because they paid the $500, or they had another kind of a visa to disembark in Cuba.
I think it's surprising to understand that these people all had the proper paperwork and they were expected to just arrive and
and Danielle, the other thing is they have the permit of disembark, but all of the refugees, all of them, they have visa for United States and Canada, but they have to wait sometime 5 years. Cuba was a transit to go waiting, because at that moment, I remember, I think United States only was giving like a 20,000, not accepting 20,000 per year, and the quota in May was already,
already had been reached.
Exactly, yeah.
It saddens me to know also, as a Canadian, we always think we're the nice ones, that Canada also did not.
And doing the research for the St. Louis, I found an article about a Black German boy that ended in the U.S. Army after the liberation. And I was surprised about his story. And I started studying about the Black German. It was a community over 60,000, and you never mentioned, because if you compare with 1 million that they killed, but all of them, they were German. Most of them, they were, for a German woman, white, and a Black, sometime from the colonies or from the First World. They came from France. Some of the soldiers, and it was 60,000, and Hitler, even when they created the law, he said that they never mentioned the name a Black German. A German is never a Black, and is part of the law. And then they use a very pejorative term, Michelin, that is a kind of mixed race, and that's the story of Lily. And I remember the day my children, Anna and Lucas, turned 7, I started writing Lily's story. And the number 7 became an obsession for me. And I remember one of the sentence about the birthday of Lily and writing about that. And right now, my children, Emma is 17 and Anna and Lucas, they are 13. But this is, okay, this is not auto fiction and it's not my story, but I think my children have a very huge influence in everything that I, and this is about the past, but history repeat itself. And when I finished writing The Night Travelers, we were living through the crisis of the abandoned children in the Mexico and US border, families separated, and children imprisoned in makeshift cages. And I remember while covering this crisis as a journalist, hearing many times how the women who send their children, the young children alone, were questioned and condemned. Going to Miami and even talking to other journalists, they're always condemning these women. And what choices does a mother or father make in order to save their child? And that became my center of the novel. And I always explain that I thought of the parents who sent their children, some 10,000, to England during the kinder transport program to save them from the Nazi death camp. Or the more of 14,000 children that Cuban parents sent along to the US in the Operation Peter Pan to protect them from the Communist Party. And, history tends to repeat itself all the time.
In terms of the women in your novel, Ali, Lilith, Nadine, and Luna, which did you enjoy writing the most and why?
Luna at the end is the hope. And I never thought I'm going to have that kind of character. At the beginning it was Ali and Lilith. But for me, Lilith is very special. And I was writing this book around, and she's the real night traveler. And even all the characters travel at night, but she's the night traveler. And in one moment, I was thinking, Lily having suffering too much, and maybe she have to end her life by herself. That was in my mind all the time, because how many pain you can survive. But at the same time, you can be alive with the hope that your child is alive. And then I created all this story with Nadine and the doll and the name. And because we're victim of the past, and the past is always with us. And when I'm talking to my children all the time, they think about the Holocaust that did happen like 3,000 years, but it was yesterday for my generation. And when you mention something like maybe the Operation Peter Pan, because we're Cuban, or the World Trade Center, the Twin Tower that I use, that tragedy that I use in The German Girl, that's the past for them, the real past. I mean, I'm trying to mix all this story, because even with, the Holocaust ended many years ago, that it can happen again. And the democracy is pending from, a very thin. And I think this is the reason that I obsess with all this story. I am a refugee at the same time. I left my country in 1991. I left my family back, my books, my photos. My grandmother died when I was in Miami. And it's a story of the humanity at the same time. And I want people to read my books, and you can enjoy it. You can identify with the character. I want you to know that there's always hope, but we're living in a very, very complicated world, and this work, you need to do something. I remember when I was in Australia during the launch of The German Girl in 2017, that someone in the audience asked me if my novel was inspired by the refugee crisis. At that time, tens of thousands of Syrian refugees were crossing borders in Europe, trying to find a country that would take them in. And I said, no. I had finished writing my book like 2 years prior in 2015. I explained that I am a refugee. And then I realized that all my novels, in their own way, examine the fear we have of the other. The one who has a different skin color or believe in a different God, speaks with a different accent, has a different sexual orientation. And the day we accept and respect our differences, that day I am convinced the world will be in a better place.
Agreed, Armando.
I talk too much, you have to.
No, it's good. We want to hear from you. A character that I found a little bit more difficult to identify with was Nadine. There's sort of like a detachment that comes across when I read Nadine.
Yeah.
How did you develop her character?
Yeah, and think about it. Nadine was abandoned because Lily was 7 years old when she left. She's going to be 8 when she left Berlin, and she has a history with her. Even for protection, children tend to put, their memories on the side or behind. And for Nadine, it was, she was growing up in a family that it was strangers for her. Even it was her mother and her father, but it was a very, they were weird people, and that was based in real people. The character from the guard from the Nazi camp, the stopping horse, that was real, and Nadine tried to. For her, it was hard to understand the decision for her mother, and at the same time, the real mother, the biological mother, and she never understood her adoptive mother, and even and worse, the father completely, yeah. And she had the opportunity to have Luna, and Luna is the one who's gonna bring the past to the present, understand the past, and it's not about forgiveness, or it's about to understand this, you're part of the history. And for Nadine was, for me, at the beginning, it was more angry than you see right now. And when she's studying and saving, when she's in the lab trying to say that if you have, and that was real too, all this piece of brain for a study from the concentration camp, she fight to treat all this part as a human being. And she was angry, of course, but you are right. And she's a character that, because she was angry and she doesn't have a past, and she doesn't have a family, and she doesn't have a face sometimes, It's hard to, you can see Ali, you can see Lilith, you can see Luna, but Nadine is a doll. It's a doll with a name,
Nadine needs Luna to want to know her whole story. Yeah.
Until you have the whole story, you are not gonna see Nadine. Yeah.
So in this novel, there are many important themes covered. Mother-daughter relationships and intergenerational trauma are addressed. How did you go about researching this aspect and making sure it rings true?
Yeah, I think when you are writing, you are not thinking about the facts and the statistic, or you are telling story. In my case, you are telling the story the most honest way that you can. You play with words, you're trying to have your perfect paragraph, and then at the same time you're building all the history that there's behind. And sometimes I spend a lot of time, and it happened with Operation Peter Pan and sending all these kids with the Catholic Church to US. And at the beginning, I have like 20 pages with those, and it ended with only one scene when Lilith goes with the girl to the church. I think it was in the Ash Wednesday, I think it was, and with the priest, and that's it. You start understanding the story step by step. And I clean, like, I edited 200 pages. I am a kind of writer that I finished my first draft with 300,000 words, and this book ended in 125,000. I am my first editors, and I try to control all the time, because I know the pace is important, and I know when I am, I am putting a lot of information and complicating the plot and all this character. I need you to have a break sometimes. I understand that, and the pace at the end is fast, because it's like you are seeing a movie, you are watching a movie, you are open the book and understanding everything. You are having all this character, developing all this character, and then even when Luna is like a oniric scene, it's like a dreaming. You don't, she's walking all these streets in Berlin and seeing all this character at the same time, and then she start writing like her grandmother. I am a little crazy when I'm building all kind of story. Yeah.
So that's very impressive to me, Armando, and I'm sure to the audience members tuning in, that you're telling us basically that you've written twice as many words and have shortened it by half. So how do you feel sad about these pieces of stories that you didn't include? Are you saving them for another book?
I think because I am an editor by myself, I work in a magazine, I have been editing for years. When I work with my editor, in this case, Peter Borland, I love when he said, Armando, maybe we need, and for him it's like trying to develop something else. And when I finished my draft of my manuscript, I sent it to him. It was, the deadline for me, they are sacred. And if you want me to still working, because you have to take my novel from me, because if not, I can spend another years working on the book. And when he said, okay, can you develop a little this? I can send him 10 pages or 3,000 words when he asked me only for a paragraph. But I know, and I'm very conscious that you have to, you have to be edited. And if not me, I am the kind of editor that I listen everybody, and I'm trying to do my best and trying to understand, some of the scene he wanted to cut. I convince him, because I am building Lilith's character. And when she dressed like a man to go with her friend to the theater, maybe it's not part of exactly the plot. Maybe you can go directly to Varadero and they have made love for the first time. But I think it's important to see that Lily, during the 40s, she dressed like a man, and she went to the theater with her friends. Because it's not you are seeing Lily in the sad, like a victim, the sad little girl who was sent to Cuba with a Jewish family when she was Catholic. No, she's a strong woman. She wants to build a family and demonstrate to her mother, all the sacrifice that the mother did, that she became a mother by herself.
Continuing with the themes in this novel, there's quite a bit about darkness and light, both literally and figuratively. On the one hand, with the very sad and cruel assessment of Lilith as a Mischling through eugenics, as well as the strength and the power Lilith finds in living in the dark with her mom and later in the shadows in a Cuban library. What surprised you when researching eugenics, or do you want to say a few words about it?
One of my first book that I bought, I think it was writing the Doris Tale. It was this book about eugenics from 1924 that it was written by American doctors in Pasadena, California. And part of my research, I understand that Hitler, he was inspired by this book, and he developed all the Nuremberg Race Law based on these studies from American doctors. And for me, I was in shock when I read that. And at the same time, this study, and had the original book, the same edition that Hitler had, and that I bought in an auction, UK doctors developed the same theories based on these eugenic studies. And I wrote at the end of the book in the notes of the author that all this eugenic and sterilization, it was active in many states here in US. In Virginia, they did this forced sterilization until 1970, and over 40,000 people. If you read the book, you're in shock. They're testing the skin color, or the side of your nose and the distance of your eyes, or the side of trying to find the perfection in the race. And it was a theory developed for American doctors. And for me, I was in shock when I read that. And when I was talking to my editor at that moment, Johanna Castillo, she said, Armando, you have to write this book right now. I said, Johanna, I'm writing the Doris Tale. Let me finish another 4 years. And because my mind is always, I'm writing right now a book that I have to finish by the end of this year. And my mind is developing another thing. I enjoy that. And
I was surprised also, not very happy about it, but to learn when I looked a little bit like you, probably not to the same extent at eugenics, that in Canada as well, up into the 1970s, especially with Aboriginal women, they were being sterilized against their will. So very sad, very sad. Armando, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about your next project. We heard just a little snippet, but in the meantime, I will ask any of our guests, if you have a question to Armando, to please put it in the Q&A or the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I am a lucky writer, because all my books, when has been acquired by Simon & Schuster, I remember for The German Girl, I only have written 10 pages. I have been working on the novel for maybe 10 years, but like 10 pages that I can show, it was really a couple of words only. And when I finished The German Girl, my agent sold to another novel. It was The Doris Tale, it was a paragraph, and The Night Traveler, it was a sentence. And when I finished The Night Traveler, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we have a house upstate New York, and we spent a year and a half in the middle of the woods with my children, working from home. I have a lot of time at that moment. And I wanted to finish a book that I have been writing, and it's another genre. And my agent and my editor said, Armando, you're really good in this, don't do that. And it's a kind of historical thriller, psychological, But I said, okay, nobody wanted, I want to finish. When I finished, my agent loved it and my editor loved it. And this is the first book that I finished and I sold. And my editor, Peter Boland, said that they wanted to buy another book. And then I sent another 2 paragraphs. I sold 3 books, one of them finished. And then the one that I have to finish this year, and I've been working on it for 3 years, the name is What We Once Were. And it's going to be the whole 20th century in Cuba. It's going to be inspired in my grandmother. My mother was born at the beginning of the century. And even is based on her is fiction, and she died by the end of the 20th century. And she went on exiling to New York during the 50s. She was part of the revolution. She was disenchanted with the revolution. I'm covering all the visit of the big generation of poets, Allen Ginsberg, all of them. They went to Cuba, and this house, it was the center for all these artists. And it's a very special book because now I'm talking about my family and adding and being creative with the family. It's not real, everything. But I enjoy a lot the book and studying different. You know, my grandmother was the first woman who divorced in Guantanamo, in Cuba. And she was a strong woman. And I have the anecdote, you know, with her in the harbor when the St. Louis arrived. I am playing with the book, you know, in a lot of work, but I'm very, very excited writing a book right now, because I always said that The Night Traveler is the more Cuban of all my books because of the second act. Because in The German Girl, Cuba is through the eyes of the Hannah and Alma, 2 German Jewish that they felt isolated in Cuba and live in this big house, and they don't understand the island. But in the second act, in The Night Travelers, Lily grow, study, get married, you know, have a child, and she's a Cuban, and she looks like a Cuban. But this one, you know, What We Once Were, is my Cuban book.
We're looking forward to it. It sounds fantastic. Now, something came into the chat from one of our listeners. And the question is, do you have any book recommendations for those of us who love your books while we wait for the next one?
Okay, a book recommendation. I am reading right now 7 Empty Houses from Samantha Schweblin. And she's an Argentinian writer, but she won the National Book Award for Translated Literature. But we share the same agent. And then I read it and I'm loving it. The last book that I read, and I'm pretty sure that is in Canada, is Trust, the Hernan Diaz. And it's one of my favorite books from 2022. It's a little acrobatic, like a literary acrobatic, but I love the book. And I think he's a great writer. Into the Distance is his first novel that is one of the best that I read too. What another book? I am you know, I try to read all these books that they are like they are literary, but at the same time they can sell a lot, and how a book that sometimes is difficult can communicate with a big audience. And I read last year, because I was late on the game, the 3 books of Hania Yanagihara. I suppose it's in Canada too. It's A Little Life that I have been sold like over 1 million copies. Her third book is The People in the Trees That I Hate. And the last one is To Paradise, that is a brilliant book. But, you know, her famous book is A Little Life. It's a really hard book. It's painful, but it's a masterpiece. Yeah.
Armando, did you read of Women and Salt? Because there are some similarities with the intergenerational.
Yeah.
Okay. I would recommend you read it. Now, okay, I will go back to the audience. We have a question from Esther. Historical fiction is my favorite genre, and it is someone with your passion for writing is something I really appreciate. So she wants to say a big thank you to you, Armando.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
She is saying that historical fiction is her favorite genre, and she is really appreciative of hearing from someone like you for today's event. So it's a big thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We have a question that is, do you know how many of the American doctors who dealt with eugenics were originally Nazi doctors from Germany?
Oh, not in Germany. You know, the team in Pasadena, it was 12 doctors, and 2 of them wrote the book. And the book, it was part of the, you know, the pre-med and medical school in US during the 20s and 30s. And then it was in UK too. But, you know, I am not saying that we have to eliminate this kind of book. You know, I think this is part of the history. We need to read. We need to read them, and we need to know that they existed, and because we're taking some part of this study only related to the race, but there are medical books very important in another, you know, part of the investigation about genes and different things. You know, they were genius, but at the same time they were monster, because, you know, it was at the beginning of the 20th century, most of the doctors think that race, it was a mistake, and mixing races, it was a mistake. It was part of the most of the constitution in some of the country, you know.
So there is a little bit of a debate I came across, Armando, for right now, because of all the advances in technology and science, a fear a little bit amongst professionals. Are we going to repeat mistakes from the past? Are we aborting embryos because we don't think they will be perfect? Did you come across that a little bit?
Remember that I have my 3 children via IVF, and if you read In Search of Emma, that is in English now, I am saying that life started when you are creating an embryo. You know, but at the same time, you know, I am pro-choice by far. But when you are creating your child, the moment that you know, it happened, the magic that with the sperm and the eggs, and you create the embryo, and the embryo divide in 4 cells, and then in 8 and 16. When I was writing, I was explaining that was life. And some people say, oh my God, then you are pro-life. No, I am pro-choice. But for me, it's important to understand. And that's the reason that I created my children in California. Because in California, the law said that the most important part of this creation of the parent is the intended parents. You can be a mother, you can be a father, and you can abandon your child or give it for adoption. But if you have the intention to be a father, that's, you know, you are protected by the law. And we were intended parents. And the surrogate mother, that she's not part of the DNA of my child, is only, you know, the carrier. She doesn't have the intention to be a mother. Even the official in the birth certificate, it said mother, you know, the surrogate, and you have to eliminate it. And because the intended parent is the most important part. And then it's applied to the embryos too. You know, if you are intending to be a child and you're intending to be a parent of this child, then there is a life. Until you are not, you're not intending to have it, there is no life there. No, they are simple cells. Yeah. This is a big debate, and I love when I work with the egg donor, for example. She feel like a donor, like, you know, sometimes people need my egg to have a child. Some people need a part of my one of my kidney to survive. when she explained that, and I very sensitive with words, I was in love with her immediately. I need to work with her. Some people decided if she's tall, if she have this kind of hair, or she's smart or not smart. When she wrote that letter to me, I was in love immediately.
Thank you so much, Armando, for spending an hour with us. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I believe our audience did also, hearing a lot more about what inspired you and your history, the amount of research you do. So everyone, please read The Night Travelers by Armando Lucas Correa.
Thank you very much. And I want to say that Canada is very special for me, because when I published my first novel, The German Girl, Canada was the first country that made The German Girl in a bestseller. The second one was Australia, and then United States. I hope I can present in person soon The Night Traveler with you guys. And, I love Canada.
Hopefully, maybe when your next novel is out, we can have you in person. Thank you so much, Armando. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.